The dog's bark shattered the silence of the funeral like a gunshot. Mourners froze, their heads snapping toward the golden retriever, its hackles raised, teeth bared at the polished oak coffin. Ethan, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt his heart lurch not just from the sound, but because he knew that dog, and he knew what it meant. Willow Creek, a sleepy town in upstate New York, wasn't supposed to have secrets this dark. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your parents' names, and the exact spot you'd parked your bike at the diner. But as Ethan stood there, his hands trembling in the pockets of his denim jacket, he felt the weight of a truth he'd buried for years. He glanced at Lucas, the man beside him, whose sharp green eyes were fixed on the coffin, unblinking. They'd both loved Jamie, the man now lying in that box. But no one in this town knew the real story. Not yet. Ethan was 24, lanky, with a mop of brown hair that always fell into his eyes. He'd grown up here, the preacher's son, always the good kid, always hiding who he was. Lucas, a year older, was the opposite, sharp-jawed, fearless, the kind of guy who'd moved to Willow Creek 5 years ago and stirred up whispers with his leather jacket and quiet defiance. They'd met at the town's only bookstore, bonding over dog-eared copies of Whitman and Baldwin, and found something in each other they couldn't name at first. Jamie, though Jamie had been the spark. Charismatic, reckless, and openly queer in a town that didn't take kindly to different. He'd drawn Ethan and Lucas into a love that was as dangerous as it was undeniable. The funeral was for Jamie, 26, who'd been found dead in his apartment 3 days ago. The official story was an overdose bills, they said, though no one specified what kind. Ethan didn't buy it. Jamie had been clean for months, fighting hard to rebuild his life. And that dog, Rusty, Jamie's loyal shadow, hadn't stopped barking since the coffin arrived. Ethan's stomach twisted as he remembered the last time he'd seen Jamie. A week ago, outside the diner. Jamie had been scared, his voice low, saying, "They know, Ethan. They know about us." Who's they? Ethan had pressed, but Jamie just shook his head, his eyes darting to the street. Now, standing in the cemetery, Ethan felt Lucas's hand brush his, a fleeting touch that grounded him. They couldn't hold hands here, not in front of the town. Not when half the mourners were whispering about Jamie's lifestyle, even now. The preacher, Ethan's father, Reverend Paul, stepped forward, his voice booming over the crowd. "Let us pray for James, who lost his way but is now with God." Ethan's jaw clenched. Lost his way. That's what they'd always called Itha's father, the mayor, the church ladies who'd once loved Jamie when he was just the high school quarterback. They'd turned on him when he came out at 18, and they'd never let him forget it. Rusty barked again, louder, lunging toward the coffin until Jamie's sister, Claire, yanked his leash. Claire, 22, was the only one who'd stood by Jamie through it all. Her eyes, red from crying, met Ethan's across the crowd. She mouthed one word, "Why?" Ethan didn't have an answer, not yet. But as the coffin was lowered into the ground, he felt Lucas's fingers tighten around his wrist. A silent promise. They'd find out what happened to Jamie. They had to. Because if they didn't, the town's lies would bury them all. The service ended, and the crowd dispersed, their murmurs fading into the evening air. Ethan and Lucas lingered by the oak tree, watching Rusty sniff the fresh dirt over Jamie's grave. "He wasn't using again," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "I know he wasn't." Lucas nodded, his jaw tight. "Someone did this to him. And Rusty knows it." They exchanged a look, the kind that carried years of trust and secrets. Ethan remembered the nights they'd spent with Jamie, the three of them tangled in laughter and quiet confessions in Jamie's tiny apartment. They dreamed of leaving Willow Creek, starting over somewhere they could be free. But Jamie had stayed, insisting he could change the town, make it see him as more than a scandal. "We need to talk to Claire," Lucas said, his voice low. She was the last one with him. Ethan nodded, but dread pooled in his chest. Claire was fierce, but she was hurting, and whatever she knew might break here them. As they walked toward Claire's car, Ethan noticed the mayor, Tom Hargrove, watching them from across the cemetery. Hargrove was a big man, all smiles and handshakes, but his eyes were cold. He'd been Jamie's biggest critic, calling him a disgrace at town meetings. Ethan's skin prickled. Hargrove knew something was sure of it. They found Claire leaning against her beat-up sedan, Rusty at her feet. Her dark hair was pulled back, her face pale. "He didn't do this to himself," she said before they could speak, her voice raw. Jamie was scared. "Ethan." He said someone was following him. "Who?" Lucas asked, stepping closer. Claire's eyes flicked to the crowd, then back to them. He wouldn't say, but he kept talking about the mill, the old paper mill by the creek. Said he saw something there he wasn't supposed to. Ethan's heart raced. The mill was abandoned, a crumbling relic where kids went to smoke or hook up. Jamie had no reason to be there unless he'd stumbled onto something dangerous. "We need to check it out," Ethan said, glancing at Lucas. Claire nodded, her lips trembling. "I'm coming with you." For Jamie. As they drove toward the mill, the sun sank below the horizon, casting Willow Creek in shadows. Ethan felt the weight of the town's secrets pressing down on him. Jamie had always said the truth would set them free. Now, Ethan wasn't sure if it would save them or destroy them. The mill loomed like a ghost against the twilight sky, its rusted silos and broken windows staring down at them. Ethan's breath caught as he stepped out of Claire's car, the gravel crunching under his boots. Rusty whined, tugging at his leash, his nose low to the ground as if he could still smell Jamie here. Lucas scanned the area, his eyes sharp. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered, but his voice held no Farronly determination. Ethan envied that. His own heart was pounding, each shadow in the overgrown weeds feeling like a threat. They weren't supposed to be here, not after dark, not when the town was already whispering about them. Claire tied Rusty to a nearby fence post, her hands shaking. "Jamie came here last week," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He wouldn't tell me why, just said it was important. Said he'd seen something that changed everything." Ethan exchanged a glance with Lucas. Jamie had always been impulsive, chasing ideas that got him into trouble. But this felt different. The mill wasn't just a teenage hang-good, it was a place where deals went down, where the town's underbelly hid. Ethan had heard rumors about late-night meetings, cars with out-of-state plates, but he'd never paid them much mind. Until now. They slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence, the metal creaking ominously. Inside, the mill was a maze of rusted machinery and rotting floorboards. The air smelled of damp wood and something sharper, like chemicals. Ethan's flashlight beam danced across the walls, catching graffiti and cobwebs. Lucas led the way, his steps sure, while Claire stayed close, her eyes scanning every corner. "Over here," Lucas called softly, pointing to a stack of crates in the corner. They were new. Unlike the rest of the mill's decay, they were still pale and unweathered. Ethan's pulse quickened as he approached. The crates were nailed shut, but there were pry marks on one, as if someone had tried to open it. "Jamie was here," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. She pointed to a spot on the ground, a faint smear of blood, barely visible in the dim light. Ethan's stomach churned. He knelt, touching the stain, his fingers trembling. It was dry, but it was real. Lucas grabbed a rusted crowbar from a nearby pile of debris and wedged it into the crate's lid. The wood splintered, revealing plastic bags inside, filled with white powder. Ethan froze. Drugs. Not just weed or pills, something serious. "This is bad," Lucas said, his voice tight. If Jamie saw this, he'd have confronted whoever's behind it. Ethan finished, his mind racing. Jamie was fearless like that, always believing he could fix things. But this wasn't a high school bully or a judgmental preacher. This was bigger. Claire's face crumpled. "He tried to tell me. He said he was going to the sheriff, but I told him to wait, to be careful." Her voice broke into a sob. "I should have listened." Ethan reached for her, but Lucas was faster, pulling her into a hug. "This isn't your fault," he said firmly. "But we need to figure out who's involved and why they'd do this." They searched the mill for more clues, finding tire tracks outside and a burner phone half buried in the dirt. The phone was dead, but Ethan pocketed it, hoping it could be salvaged. As they left, Rusty's low growl stopped them. Headlights flashed in the distance, cutting through the darkness. Someone was coming. "Hide," Lucas hissed, pulling them behind a rusted silo. A black SUV rolled up, its engine idling. Two men got out, their voices low but urgent. Ethan strained to hear, catching fragments. "Clean it up. Can't let them find." One of the men was Mayor Hargrove. Ethan's blood ran cold. They waited, barely breathing, until the SUV drove off. Claire's eyes were wide with fear. "Hargrove. He's in on this," she whispered. "He's been running this town forever," Lucas said grimly. "If he's involved, we're not just dealing with a drug ring. This goes deeper." Ethan's mind spun. Hargrove had always been the town's golden boy, charming and untouchable. But he'd hated Jamie, called him a problem at every chance. Had Jamie's death been a warning? A cover-up? Ethan felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce. Jamie deserved better than this. They drove back to Claire's place, the burner phone heavy in Ethan's pocket. Lucas sat in the front, his jaw set, while Rusty curled up in the back, still uneasy. "We need to charge this phone," Ethan said. "If there's anything on it, texts. Calsick could tell us who Jamie was dealing with." Claire nodded, wiping her eyes. "I have a charger that might work. But we have to be careful. If Hargrove knows we're poking around, we won't let him win," Lucas said, his voice like steel. Ethan looked at him, grateful for his strength but terrified of what lay ahead. They were in over their heads, but there was no turning back. Not for Jamie. At Claire's apartment, they plugged in the phone, waiting as it powered up. Ethan's thoughts drifted to Jamie, the way he'd laughed, the way he'd kissed them both under the stars, promising they'd all get out of Willow Creek someday. That dream was gone, but Ethan would fight for the truth, no matter what it cost. The burner phone flickered to life, its cracked screen casting a faint glow in Claire's dimly lit kitchen. Ethan's heart pounded as he tapped the power button, praying it held answers. Lucas leaned over his shoulder, his breath warm against Ethan's neck, while Claire clutched Rusty's collar, her eyes fixed on the screen. The phone was locked, but the wallpaper, a blurry photo of Jamie laughing in a park, made Ethan's chest ache. "He used this for something important," Ethan said, his voice tight. "Something he didn't want traced." Lucas frowned, taking the phone. "We need to get into it. Any guesses on the passcode?" Ethan shook his head, but Claire spoke up, her voice soft. "Try 0613. It was his mom's birthday." Ethan typed it in, and the screen unlocked. A rush of adrenaline hit him as he opened the messages. There were only a few, all from an unknown number. The last one, sent the night Jamie died. Read, meet me at the mill. Midnight. Don't tell anyone. Ethan's stomach dropped. Jamie had gone to that meeting and never came back. There's more, Lucas said, scrolling through the phone. A memo app held a single note. Hargrove. Sheriff. Mill. They're lying. Ethan's breath caught. The sheriff, too. Sheriff Daniels had been at the funeral, his face grim but unreadable. He'd been the one to call Jamie's death an overdose, closing the case before anyone could ask questions. We need to talk to Daniels, Claire said, her voice shaking but resolute. If he's involved, we need proof. Lucas shook his head. Not yet. If he's in on it, going to him is suicide. We need to know what Jamie saw at the mill, something worth killing for. Ethan nodded, but his mind was racing. Jamie had always been reckless, but he wasn't stupid. If he'd gone to the mill that night, he'd known the risk. Ethan's eyes stung as he remembered Jamie's voice. Fierce and hopeful. We can change this town. Ethan. We can make them see us. But Willow Creek didn't want to see them. It wanted them silent. They decided to lay low for the night, splitting up to avoid suspicion. Ethan went back to his parents' house, slipping in quietly to avoid his father. Reverend Paul was in his study, his voice carrying through the door as he spoke on the phone. Ethan paused, catching the words, "Keep it quiet," and "the boy's gone." His blood ran cold. Was his father involved, too? He crept upstairs, his mind spinning. In his room, he pulled out a photo from his nightstand. Lucas and Jamie, arms around each other at the county fair last summer. Jamie's grin was wide, his eyes bright with life. Ethan's throat tightened. He couldn't lose Lucas, too. But staying quiet wasn't an option anymore. The next morning, Ethan met Lucas at the diner. A greasy spoon where the coffee was bad but the booths were private. Lucas looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed, but he managed a small smile. You okay? He asked, his hand brushing Ethan's under the table. No, Ethan admitted. But I'm not giving up. He told Lucas about his father's phone call, the cryptic words that felt like a betrayal. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt, letting Ethan pour out his fear and guilt. We need to go back to the mill, Lucas said finally. There's got to be more evidence, something we missed. Ethan nodded, though the thought of returning made his skin crawl. They needed answers, and the mill was their only lead. They waited until dusk, sneaking back to the mill with Rusty in tow. The dog was restless, sniffing the ground as if chasing a ghost. Inside, they found more crates, some already emptied. But in a corner, half hidden by a tarp, was a ledger handwritten, filled with names, dates, and numbers. Ethan flipped through it, his heart racing. Hargrove's name was there, alongside Sheriff Daniels and others Ethan recognized from town council meetings. This is it, Lucas whispered, his voice urgent. This is what Jamie found, a drug ring, and half the town's in on it. Claire, who joined them, clutched the ledger, her face pale. They killed him to keep this quiet, she said, her voice breaking. My brother died for this. Before they could process it, headlights swept across the mill's broken windows. Another SUV. They ducked behind a machine, Rusty growling softly. Ethan's heart pounded as voices echoed Hargrove again. And someone else. A woman. We need to move the rest tonight, she said. The preacher's getting nervous. Ethan's world tilted. The preacher. His father. He felt Lucas's hand on his shoulder, steadying him, but the betrayal cut deep. They waited until the voices faded, then slipped out, the ledger tucked under Lucas's jacket. Back at Claire's, they pored over the ledger, piecing together a network of corruption that ran through Willow Creek's core. Jamie had stumbled onto it, and it had cost him his life. Ethan felt a fire ignite inside him, anger. Yes, but also a fierce need to make this right. For Jamie. For them all. Ethan couldn't sleep. The ledger's pages burned into his mind. Names, dates, dollar amounts, proof that Willow Creek's leaders were profiting off misery. He sat on the edge of his bed. The photo of him, Lucas, and Jamie staring back at him. Jamie's death wasn't an accident, and his own father might have played a role. At dawn, he met Lucas and Claire at the town library, a quiet place where they could talk without being overheard. Rusty lay at their feet, his eyes fixed on the door as if expecting trouble. Claire spread the ledger on a table, her finger tracing Hargrove's name. "He's the key," she said. "He's been mayor for 15 years. Nothing happens in this town without his say-so." Lucas nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "We need to connect this to Jamie's death. The ledger's damning, but it's not enough to prove murder." Ethan's throat tightened. "What about my dad?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "I heard him on the phone. He's involved somehow." Claire's eyes softened. "Ethan, we don't know that for sure. He might just be caught up in Hargrove's web, like the others." Lucas reached for Ethan's hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out. Together." The touch was brief, but it steadied Ethan's racing heart. He wanted to believe Lucas, wanted to trust that they could unravel this without losing everything. They decided to dig into the ledger's names, starting with the sheriff. Daniels had been quick to label Jamie's death an overdose, shutting down any investigation. If he was protecting Hargrove, they needed proof. Lucas suggested checking Jamie's apartment for anything the police might have missed. Claire hesitated, her eyes glistening. "It's hard, going back there," she admitted. "But I'll do it. For him." Jamie's apartment was a small, cluttered space above the hardware store, filled with books, vinyl records, and half-finished paintings. Ethan's chest ached as he stepped inside, the scent of Jamie's cologne still lingering. Rusty whined, curling up on Jamie's old couch. Claire started searching the desk, while Lucas checked the bedroom. Ethan stood frozen, memories flooding him late nights here, the three of them dreaming of a future where they didn't have to hide. "Found something," Lucas called, emerging with a small notebook tucked inside a pillowcase. It was Jamie's handwriting, frantic and uneven. The last entry read, "Hargrove's meeting someone at the mill, November 12th. If I don't make it, tell Ethan and Lucas I love them." Ethan's eyes burned. November 12th was the night Jamie died. Claire clutched the notebook, tears streaming down her face. He knew he was in danger. She whispered, "Why didn't he tell us?" "He was trying to protect us," Lucas said, his voice rough. Ethan wanted to scream, to tear the town apart for what it had done to Jamie. But they had to be smart. The notebook was another piece of the puzzle, but they needed more. They decided to follow the ledger's trail to a name they didn't expect, Margaret Lane, the town librarian. She was in her 50s, quiet, always kind to Jamie. Her name appeared next to large cash transfers, marked consulting fees. It didn't add up. "We need to talk to her," Ethan said, though the thought of confronting someone so unassuming felt wrong. At the library, Margaret was shelving books, her smile fading when she saw their expressions. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle but wary. Claire didn't hesitate, pulling out the ledger and pointing to Margaret's name. "Explain this," she said, her tone sharp. Margaret's face paled. She glanced around, then motioned them to a back room. I didn't want any part of it, she whispered, her hands trembling. Hargrove forced me to handle the money, said he'd ruin my family if I didn't. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Did you know about Jamie? Ethan asked, his voice breaking. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I heard rumors. After. I'm so sorry. She handed them a flash drive. This has record smells. Transactions. It's all I have. Please, be careful. They left the library with the flash drive, their minds reeling. Margaret's story confirmed Hargrove's power, but it also painted a bigger pictorial network that reached beyond Willow Creek. Ethan felt a chill. They were close, but every step brought them closer to danger. That night, Lucas stayed over at Ethan's. The two of them curled up in his childhood bed, whispering in the dark. I'm scared, Ethan admitted, his voice muffled against Lucas's chest. Me too, Lucas said, his arms tightening around him. But Jamie believed in us. We're doing this for him. Ethan nodded, drawing strength from Lucas's warmth. They'd face whatever came next together. The flash drive burned a hole in Ethan's pocket as they huddled in Claire's apartment, the weight of their discoveries pressing down on them. Rusty lay by the door, his ears pricked, as if he sensed the danger closing in. The drive held emails between Hargrove, Sheriff Daniels, and others, proof of a drug trafficking ring that had been operating out of the mill for years. Jamie's name appeared in one message. Chillingly blunt, he's a problem. Handle it. Ethan's hands shook as he read it aloud. Claire's face crumpled, and Lucas slammed his fist on the table, his eyes blazing. They killed him, Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous. And they're going to pay. But paying meant exposing the truth in a town that thrived on lies. Willow Creek's leaders had built a facade of wholesomeness, and Jamie's death was just collateral damage. Ethan felt a surge of guilt, stayed silent too long, hiding his love for Jamie and Lucas to avoid his father's wrath. Now, that silence felt like complicity. We need to go public, Claire said, her voice steady despite her tears. The newspaper, the internet, someone has to listen. Lucas shook his head. Hargrove owns the local paper, and the sheriff's got eyes everywhere. We need someone outside the town, someone we can trust. Ethan thought of Sarah Miller, a journalist who'd grown up in Willow Creek, but now worked for a Syracuse news outlet. She'd been friends with Jamie in high school, one of the few who'd never judged him. Sarah, Ethan said. She'd believe us. They reached out to Sarah, sending her a cryptic email with just enough detail to pique her interest. She agreed to meet them at a diner outside town, far from prying eyes. As they drove, Ethan's mind raced. The flash drive, the ledger, Jamie's notebook, it was enough to bring Hargrove down, but it also painted a target on their backs. At the diner, Sarah listened intently, her notepad filling with scribbled notes. She was in her late 20s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. This is big, she said, her voice low. But it's dangerous. Hargrove's connected state-level politicians, maybe higher. You're sure you want to do this? Ethan glanced at Lucas, then Claire. For Jamie, he said, his voice firm. Sarah nodded, promising to dig into the story and protect their identities as sources. Back in Willow Creek, tension hung over them like a storm cloud. Ethan's father noticed his absence, his questions growing sharper. Where have you been, Ethan? Reverend Paul asked one evening, his eyes narrowing. You're not mixed up in something, are you? Ethan's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. Just grieving, Dad. The lie tasted bitter, but he couldn't trust his father, not yet. That night, Lucas and Ethan sat on the roof of Claire's apartment building, the stars bright above them. "I miss him," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "Every day?" Lucas pulled him close, his lips brushing Ethan's forehead. "I know. But we're going to make this right. For him. And for us." The next day, they got a call from Sarah. She'd found a whistleblower, a former deputy who'd left the sheriff's department after refusing to cover up Hargrove's dealings. His testimony, combined with their evidence, could break the story wide open. But there was a catch. The deputy wanted to meet in person, at a park outside town. It felt like a risk, but they had no choice. They drove to the park, Rusty in the back, his presence a reminder of Jamie's spirit. The deputy, a grizzled man named Carl, was waiting on a bench, his eyes darting nervously. "I knew Jamie," he said, his voice rough. "Good kid. Didn't deserve what they did." Carl confirmed everything: drugs, the payoffs, Hargrove's iron grip on the town. He'd seen Jamie at the mill that night, arguing with someone in the shadows. "I didn't know they'd kill him," Carl said, his voice breaking. "I thought they'd just scare him." Ethan's vision blurred with tears. Lucas gripped his hand, grounding him. They thanked Carl, promising to protect his name. As they left, Ethan noticed a car idling nearby, too far to make out the driver. His stomach twisted. Were they being watched? Back at Claire's, they planned their next move. Sarah was ready to publish, but they needed one more piece of evidence, something to tie Hargrove directly to Jamie's death. Ethan's mind kept circling back to his father. If Reverend Paul was involved, confronting him might be their only chance. Ethan stood outside his father's study, his heart pounding like a drum. The door was ajar, and he could hear Reverend Paul's voice, low and tense, on the phone. "It's under control, Tom. No one's asking questions." Ethan's blood ran cold. Tom. Hargrove. His father was in deeper than he'd feared. He pushed the door open, and his father looked up, startled. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Ethan said, his voice shaking but resolute. He pulled out the ledger, slamming it on the desk. "What do you know about this? About Jamie?" Reverend Paul's face drained of color. He stood, his hands trembling. "You don't understand what you're getting into, son. Walk away. Walk away." Ethan's voice rose, years of anger spilling out. "Jamie's dead, Dad. And you're protecting the people who did it." His father's eyes darted to the ledger, then back to Ethan. "I didn't know they'd. I thought they'd just scare him. Hargrove said it was for the town's good, to keep things stable." Ethan felt like he'd been punched. His father, the man who'd preached love and forgiveness, had known Jamie was in danger and done nothing. "You let him die?" Ethan whispered, tears burning his eyes. Reverend Paul reached for him, but Ethan stepped back. "I'm sorry," his father said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting you." Ethan turned and left, the weight of betrayal crushing him. He drove to Claire's, where Lucas and Claire were waiting, their faces tense. He told them everything, his voice raw. Lucas pulled him into a hug, his strength a lifeline. "We're not giving up," Lucas said. "Not now." Claire nodded, her eyes fierce. "We confront Hargrove. He's the head of this. If we can get him to crack, the whole thing falls apart." They planned carefully, knowing Hargrove was dangerous. Sarah's story was set to run in 2 days, but they needed a confession to seal it. They decided to lure Hargrove to the mill, using an anonymous tip about new evidence found there. It was risky, but it was their best shot. The night was cold. The mill's shadows deeper than before. Ethan, Lucas, and Claire hid inside. Rusty tethered nearby, his ears alert. They'd planted a fake crate, hoping to draw Hargrove out. When his SUV pulled up, Ethan's heart raced. Hargrove stepped out, alone, his flashlight sweeping the darkness. "Where's the evidence?" Hargrove called, his voice sharp. Ethan stepped forward, his hands raised, the ledger in one hand. "Right here," Ethan said, his voice steady despite his fear. "We know everything. Hargrove. The drugs. The payoffs. Jamie's murder." Hargrove's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you can take me down? Preacher's boy. This town belongs to me." Lucas emerged from the shadows, his phone recording. "Not anymore," he said, his voice calm but deadly. Claire stepped out, too, holding the flash drive. Hargrove's eyes widened, realizing he was cornered. "You killed Jamie," Claire said, her voice trembling with rage. "He found your dirty little secret, and you silenced him." Hargrove laughed, but it was hollow. "You've got no proof. Just a dead junkie and some papers no one will believe." Rusty's growl cut through the air, low and menacing. The dog lunged, snapping at Hargrove's leg, forcing him to stumble. In that moment, Lucas grabbed Hargrove's arm, twisting it behind his back. "Talk," Lucas said, "or we take this to the state police." Hargrove's bravado cracked. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered. "Jamie saw too much. He was going to ruin everything." Ethan's heart broke, but he held the ledger up. "It's over, Hargrove. You're done." They left him there, shaken, and drove to Sarah's hotel, handing over the recording. She listened, her eyes wide. "This is enough," she said. "This will bury him." As they left, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and grief. They'd gotten justice for Jamie, but the cost was steep. His father's betrayal, the town's hypocrisy, it would take time to heal. But he had Lucas and Claire, and they'd face it together. Sarah's story hit the Syracuse paper like a bomb, its headline screaming, "Willow Creek's dark secret, corruption and murder." By noon, the state police were in town, raiding Hargrove's office and the mill. Sheriff Daniels was arrested, his badge stripped as cameras flashed. Ethan watched it unfold on Claire's TV, his heart heavy but resolute. The town was in chaos. Neighbors whispered, some in shock, others in denial. Reverend Paul had gone silent, locking himself in his study, unable to face Ethan. The betrayal still stung, but Ethan couldn't focus on it, not yet. He, Lucas, and Claire had a promise to keep, to honor Jamie's memory. They met at the cemetery, standing by Jamie's grave. Rusty lay beside it, calmer now, as if he knew the truth was out. Claire placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the headstone, her voice soft. "We did it, Jamie. They can't hurt you anymore." Lucas took Ethan's hand, not caring who saw. "He'd be proud of us," he said, his voice steady. Ethan nodded, tears falling. For the first time, he felt like he could breathe, like the town's weight was lifting. But the fight wasn't over. Hargrove's arrest sparked a reckoning. Families whose loved ones had been lost to the town's drug epidemic came forward, their stories echoing Jamie's. Ethan, Lucas, and Claire became symbols of resistance, their love for Jamie a beacon for others who'd been silenced. They spoke at community meetings, their voices shaking but strong, demanding change. One night, Lucas and Ethan sat by the creek, the water glinting under the moonlight. "I keep thinking about what Jamie said," Ethan murmured. About changing this town. Lucas smiled, his hand warm in Ethan's. He already did. Through us. They kissed. Soft and sure. No longer hiding. It wasn't freedom not yet, but it was a start. Claire joined them, Rusty trotting beside her. Sarah's doing a follow-up, she said. She wants to tell our story, yours. Mine. Jamie's. The real one. Ethan hesitated. Coming out publicly meant facing the town's judgment head-on. But he thought of Jamie, fearless and unapologetic, and nodded. Let's do it. For him. The article ran a week later, detailing their love, their loss, and their fight. It wasn't just about Jamie's death, it was about a town forced to confront its prejudice, its complicity. Some residents turned away, but others reached out, offering support. A few teens, inspired, started an LGBTQ support group at the high school, naming it after Jamie. Ethan's father finally spoke to him, his voice heavy with regret. I was wrong, Ethan. About so much. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a crack in the wall between them. As winter settled over Willow Creek, Ethan, Lucas, and Claire began planning a memorial for Jimmy, a community center where anyone could be themselves. No questions asked. They'd fund it with donations, with Sarah's help, and make it a place Jamie would have loved. The town was changing. Slowly. Painfully. But it was changing. And Ethan knew, as he stood with Lucas and Claire, that Jamie's spirit was with them, pushing them forward. Spring came to Willow Creek, and with it, the groundbreaking for Jamie's place, the community center they dreamed of. Ethan stood in the empty lot, a shovel in his hand, Lucas and Claire beside him. Rusty bounded around them, chasing butterflies, his energy a reminder of the joy Jamie had brought. The crowd was small but growing townsfolk who'd read Sarah's articles, who'd seen the truth and wanted to be part of something better. Ethan's father was there, too, standing at the back, his face etched with guilt, but also hope. They hadn't fully reconciled, but they were trying, one painful conversation at a time. Ethan took a deep breath, stepping to the microphone. This is for Jamie, he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. For everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. We're building a place where love wins, no matter what. The crowd clapped, some tearfully. Lucas squeezed Ethan's hand, his smile proud. Claire spoke next, her voice fierce as she shared Jamie's story, not just his death, but his life, his laughter, his courage. He loved this town, she said, and we're going to make it worthy of him. As they broke ground, Ethan felt a warmth in his chest, like Jamie was there, cheering them on. The center would have a library, a meeting space, an art studio, everything Jamie had loved. It would be a haven for kids like them, who'd grown up hiding who they were. After the ceremony, Ethan and Lucas walked to the creek, their hands intertwined. We did it, Ethan said, his voice soft. He'd love this. Lucas nodded, his eyes bright. He's still with us. You know. In every step we take. They sat by the water, talking about the future, not just the center, but their lives. They'd stay in Willow Creek, for now, to see Jamie's place through. But they dreamed of traveling, of finding a place where they could be fully themselves. Claire joined them, Rusty at her heels. I got a letter from Sarah, she said, grinning. She's nominated us for a community award. Says we're heroes. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. We're not heroes. We just loved him. That's enough, Lucas said, pulling them both into a hug. And it was. Love had carried them through grief, through danger, through a town's darkest lies. It had given them strength to fight, to heal, to build something new. As the sun set, casting golden light over the creek, Ethan felt peace settle over him. Jamie's death had exposed Willow Creek's ugliness, but it had also sparked change. The town wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was learning. And Jamie's place would be a beacon, a promise that love could outshine hate. They stood together, 3 against the world, with Rusty barking happily at their feet. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs. And somewhere, Ethan knew, Jamie was smiling.